Welcome, everyone. So, I have the honor to do consults with not only the practitioners on mycotoxin results, but also with the general public. So, that's quite a window onto the world of mold illness. So, I'm going to use some languaging that's going to give you languaging when you're talking to patients to get them to understand mold and to take it seriously. So, what do you think is the main question people ask, other than what do these numbers mean? The main question people ask is, how bad is it? Right? So one guy says, so this is a report card. Is this a C or an F? So we're going to get to why that's maybe not the right question. And we've got blood pressure here for mycotoxins that doesn't seem quite like it fits. But if you think about POTS syndrome, so one of the factors behind POTS syndrome can be mycotoxin illness. So what is mold exactly? So myco means fungus, like mushroom or fungus. So mycotoxins are mold toxins. We know this. So over 300 species of molds make mycotoxins, but not all molds make mycotoxins. So what are mycotoxins then? So I want to just be very blunt. This is going to help your patients get it, that mold is rot. So the mycotoxins that are made from primarily filamentous fungi that are saprophytes. They feed on dead plant and animal material. So yeah, that's gross. So that'll kind of help them start to think, yes, it may just look like this thing on the wall there that's black, but here's why I need to take this seriously, because human beings universally have an aversion to rot. So you wouldn't spray Febreze on your trash unless you're doing a silly commercial. And so we want rot to get out of the house. That's kind of a given. And so we have to kind of talk people through that process. It's really like a counseling session where they're having to process in real time how you're explaining what the mold is, and therefore they're going to make decisions to act on that. It's a furry fungus. So it's actually breaking down and decaying matter or rot. Different molds make different mycotoxins. So some mycotoxins are the same mycotoxin can be made from more than one mold. What are mycotoxins? They're secondary metabolites. So they're not key to the life and eating of the mold. So they'd be more like plants make essential oils for defense. That's a secondary metabolite. So we think of the mycotoxins for defense. I would argue they might also be offense to help them claim territory. Like penicillin, bread mold is attacking to gain access to more of the bread. So we have some benefits to some mycotoxins. If you consume the mold with the penicillin, you could actually get sick. So it's extracted for its benefit. And some mycotoxins are extracted also for their dangerous aspects. There was some that were used called yellow rain bioweapon experiment, and some have been used for other kinds of medications. We'll get to that. So let's look at some of our key players that we're going to be seeing on mold tests. Penicillium makes ochratoxin. Now we're looking primarily at indoor molds. So when they look at the results, they say, well, what if I was just eating some food that had some molds, right? That's one of the most common questions. And the answer is sure, that's possible. It's very rare. I haven't seen one yet, because you would see like a high amount of one mold. The vast majority of people have maybe 3, 4, sometimes even 5 of these elevated together. And the one that there's no way it's an outdoor mold is Stachybotrys. Stachybotrys, you're going to see on the test results, trichothecenes. There are different kinds of trichothecenes, but the ones that we look for on testing, the macrocyclic trichothecenes, those are only from Stachybotrys. The official name for Stachybotrys is black mold, which can be green. And Stachybotrys lives usually on the back of your drywall. So it can be one of the harder ones to find. That's a whole nother conversation about finding the mold and treating the mold in the building. So Aspergillus makes aflatoxin and gliotoxins, and Fusarium makes zearalenone. We just say zearalenone, make it a little easier. And that one can come from foods. So some of these can come from foods, but what we see on the testing is it's just usually not the case. So how do we know if we want to start looking for mold toxins? Well, have you recently moved? Is there a link to the worsening or improving of your health situation? Have you had plumbing problems or leaks or flooding in your area? And that includes your car. Your car can have mold. Your workplace can have mold. Do you have air conditioning? So HVAC systems are a great place for mold to hang out. Is your building newer or older. So newer building materials are great food for mold, but older buildings have had more time to have more leaks and develop mold problems. Do you eat a lot of potentially moldy foods? And the universal question is, do you have pipes running through your walls? Because really, I think that's one of the biggest issues with mold is that for decades now, back to the early 1900s, we have pipes running through the walls with no system to monitor and prevent the moisture and the mold. And to me, that's after doing so many of these consults, it starts to become a little crazy as to why we don't have that as part of our home system of maintenance. So mycotoxin symptoms are vague, multi-system, and hard to pin down. So most patients have been to a number of doctors, they've been through a lot of tests, and they don't really find much wrong or that can account for their symptoms. The biggest one is fatigue, greater fatigue and newer fatigue. Not the usual, we're all tired because we're busy, right? And when people with fatigue are told that by family members, yeah, we're all tired, we're busy, but it's not the same. Immune suppression. So mycotoxins are individual chemicals. They do a lot of different things, but they tend to have immune suppressing effects, and some of them tend to have neurological effects. So that can be central or peripheral nerves. A lot of aches and sleep problems. Sometimes the first thing someone might find is they have no history of anxiety and they start having panic attacks. Very unusual. So be suspicious about that kind of suddenly waking up in the middle of the night for no reason as a habit. Okay, so in terms of immune dysregulation, the gliotoxin specifically suppresses intracellular immunity, fighting organisms that go in your cell. Aflatoxin and trichothecenes are particularly immune suppressive. You might see chronic UTIs, a worsening of autoimmunity. Some of these are even used as anti-rejection medications in pharmaceuticals, and like things like Cellcept and Myfortic, to suppress the immune system on purpose. We also have overactivation of the immune system, and one of the best ways to have an overactive immune system is to have a deficient immune system. It tends to go into overreact mode. We can get CIRS, chronic inflammatory response syndrome. So any level of mold activity you might feel in the lungs, just waking up with that tightness of the chest. I was living in a home once that I hadn't realized yet was a moldy, because it's usually behind the walls and may not always notice, may not have a lot of smells yet. And I would go to the acupuncturist for something else, and she would keep treating my lungs, and she said, "It's like you've been crying hard or coughing a lot." And I was like, "No, I just drove over here having a regular day." So a lot of lung symptoms. CIRS is a more serious inflammation. But I think at any level, mycotoxin illness is going to involve inflammation. So inflammation, of course, makes you fatigued, potentially depressed or anxious. Brain fog is one of the biggest ones for mold illness. So for serious mold toxin, there's one company I know of that compounds glutathione for a concentration that's specific to use intranasally, and using that glutathione intranasally, getting it right to the brain. We're going to be talking more about glutathione later. Digestive troubles, headaches are big, and just other aches and pains. So links to chronic illness, almost any kind of immune dysregulation is going to be worsened or can be promoted by mycotoxins. So there's not like a specific list of diseases to look for. The commonality is that it's underdiagnosed. So we like to say basically doctors are seeing mold illness every day, and they don't know it. So it's crucial for mycotoxin illness to be kind of constantly on your differential and in your thinking, especially persistent infections or immune-related symptoms. Okay, so cognition is really one of the biggest areas, cognition and fatigue, so the big brain fog. And this bears out statistically versus controls, 62% brain fog versus 11%. And then neuropsychological, 31 individuals exposed to mold, reduced cognitive function, particularly memory and executive function. So people will really have issues with memory. That's very typical. Okay, so diagnosing neurological disease is very difficult. Even if the person were to pass away and we were to examine the tissues, we may not see anything, or it may not be specific enough to say, yes, that's from the mold toxins. So we really are going on clinical signs and symptoms and history. And then we want to go looking for the mycotoxins. So how to test for mycotoxins. So based on your interview and the patient's history, are you suspecting mycotoxins. Now, there's also, of course, mold allergy. Molds even make volatile organic compounds as a way to help make us sick, but we don't have a measurement for that yet, to my knowledge. And you can be infested with mold or infected. It's not as common, and you would be treating that last. So I talked to someone this week who had been given itraconazole, and that's great. I've had a wonderful life-changing stories of people with itraconazole, but this person got it too soon, and they were very sick. They were having throat spasms that continued. So we do all of our steps of detoxing first before we try to kill and have die-off going on. Is there an obvious mold source? Sometimes we can smell it or we can see something under the sink. Often not the case. Are you worried about food exposure? And what information would help most with your treatment plan? So we'll get to a case and how to prioritize. So mycotoxins, again, are many different individual chemical structures. And of course, anything that comes in the body, we want to alter it. The liver gets a pass and adds something on and alters the compound. So we want to make sure that we can identify it after it's been altered. So the different ways of testing can include ELISA and mass spectrometry. So here's Waldo. So Waldo, let's say, is 6 foot tall, 180 pounds, blue hair, and last seen wearing the glasses and the striped lab coat. So let's say Waldo is a mycotoxin, and both mass spec and ELISA will be able to detect Waldo as he is. But once the liver adds something on, so let's say Waldo adds a hat, mass spec will no longer be able to recognize. Like, he's different, we're not sure, is it the same guy? Whereas ELISA will be able to detect that. So that's going to have a big impact on our testing. And here's an example of aflatoxin and the different forms. And notice here we've got some binding to DNA. So sometimes we're just inhibiting straight up DNA function with these mold toxins. So I want to point out that mold toxins, like other toxins, are going to disrupt mitochondrial function and damage the mitochondria. So we can see that and start to work with some of that on an organic acids test. Right? Organic acids are looking at the metabolic processes, breakdown products, including detoxification. You can also see neurotoxicity. Mycotoxins are particularly using the phase 1 liver pathway, the cytochrome P450 enzymes. And impaired function due to mycotoxins, is going to really inhibit your energy. In fact, some of the mycotoxins just impair ATP directly. Hence the fatigue. So considerations: assess organic acid levels so you can gauge the mitochondrial function. You can look at their detoxification, how it's going. You can also look at neurotoxicity. The RTL tox test does mycotoxins, organic acids, and environmental exposures. You want to look also at food sensitivity testing or allergy if they have symptoms. IgE, IgG1 through 3, and A, for a holistic understanding of what they might be reacting to. And then as far as treatment, we're going to identify and remove the mold, right? So step 1 is find the leak, if there is one. And then step 2, get an inspection, remediate. It's not always tens of thousands of dollars. Sometimes the leak hasn't really been there that long or it's not that big. And then retest to make sure the home is actually cleared up. And we're saying the home as if it's always the home. We're going to see a case example. It's not always the person's home. So we're going to support detox pathways. And then once we're properly supporting pathways and they're not living in the active mold, then they're going to actively detoxify and push out the toxins. So let's look at relapsing Rita. So Rita has all the classic symptoms, some digestive symptoms, but particularly the fatigue, aches, headache, and feels dumb. So there's that kind of, I can't count on my brain. It's not really bad all the time. I just can't count on it when I might need it. She has a history of mold toxicity and thyroid cancer that was treated. And we did look at food sensitivities. She had some previous genetic testing, so she does have some issue with mold detoxification. And she's the only one in the family showing the symptoms. I've had 2 families just in a couple months where they contacted us. They said, the testing was wrong. Our daughter is very sick and she tested negative and the rest of the family tested positive for mycotoxins. And I said, that is no accident that the sickest family member tested negative. So what you would do is do 5 to 7 days of liposomal glutathione, 250 if they can handle up to 500 milligrams, and then test. And you'll get your results. They'll be there for sure. So we did mold detox with her. She felt better, but then relapsed. And this is pretty common. They might move somewhere else or the home gets some other situation. They might get some other mold exposure. So here's her testing. This is a classic result. She's got 4 out of 5 and maybe 5 out of 5. So the way that we develop this test is you take the known toxin in urine and dilute it down. What's the smallest amount that's reliably detectable? That's called present. And not quite reliable, that's equivocal. And that's different for each toxin, the level that's going to meet that requirement. So she doesn't look that bad. If you compare her value, to the value present, it's a 2 and she has a 3, all right? Or it's a 0.09, she has a 0.17. It doesn't look that bad. That doesn't tell us how sick the person is if they're not excreting well. So her mitochondrial function, her lactate is elevated, and that could be a marker for hypoxia. Think after you've done a big workout and you're aching and starting to run low on oxygen. So the citric acid cycle markers overall look pretty good. We want to look at the population percentile. Most markers, we want them between 30 and 70%. So she's not doing too badly overall, but here we can see that we're having an issue. Then for her detoxification, again, we want to see these all roughly 30 to 70%, and they're all a little towards the upregulated side, which is not surprising. And we want to see the benzoate not applicable because it should quickly convert to hippurate. It shouldn't be staying elevated, so that's good. So the treatment plan, this is a classic mycotoxin detox plan here. The glutathione binder, big general combination liver detox support, plus CoQ10 and vitamin C. Now we've thrown in the B complex for sanity because we're supporting the citric acid pathways for her energy. It's not a classic part of the mycotoxin detox itself. Once we're supporting these adequately, we can start to push out toxins if she's no longer in the mold. And push out toxins is 30 minutes of sweating 5-6 days a week, preferably infrared sauna if possible. There are chair options and sauna blanket options for those who can't afford thousands of dollars to put an infrared sauna in their home. And I like to not use the word electrolyte. They're obviously going to need an electrolyte. You might want to offer a high quality mineral supplement because we don't want them using something like a Gatorade. Sorry, Gatorade. I'm from Florida. Her mycotoxin test was positive. Now, the only mycotoxin that I know of that is different, really different, is zearalenone, and it acts like an estrogen. So suppressing sperm count, messing up female cycles. In lab animals, we do see miscarriages. So we want to get that taken care of, and we want to also support those hormones. So testing and supporting, and for instance, supporting progesterone to help create balance there while we're working on the situation. She did a home cleanup. And it turns out that the source of her mold was not so much her home, but they were rehabbing a neighbor's house and they were bringing the mold toxins home. So she was the only one affected. I know of a young lady whose life was devastated. She was disabled by mold exposure. Their home got flooding in the basement. I recall growing up in Chicago, we had flooding in the basement. It was a regular thing there. And her parents were fine, just fine, her biological parents, and she was disabled and devastatingly ill. So we normally think, if we're all in a room and it starts filling up with toxic smoke, we're all going to be affected equally. And we see that's very much not the case with mold. So let's look at complicated Kathy. She is a 35-year-old with sinusitis since high school, migraines, floaters, so a lot of neurological kind of issues. Feels like an elephant sitting on her face, nail infections, can't lose baby weight. So we see weight loss or weight gain, unintentional. I had a practitioner this summer, he and his wife living in a moldy basement, waiting to get their house ready, and just upping his game with the exercise and the diet and losing weight, and turns out to have the mold toxins. And of course, many people are experiencing unintended weight gain or difficulty losing the weight. Years ago, I had something that might have been a parasite, but it went away. And a host of symptoms. Notice the loss of balance. We call it being tipsy. Anxiety is very common, and it's not hard to be depressed or anxious when your life starts to become difficult or fall apart with disabling illness. But the neurotoxin itself can be really promoting that too. So some clues. What do we do with someone with so much going on, right? Where do we start? So she had been living in the basement of her parents' home. So living in the basement is kind of always a clue. It was an older home, and her family members had a number of immune kind of issues and some some neuroinflammation kind of issues. Overall, she's severely ill, missing life, right? She's just basically missing life and sleeping a lot. So the initial plan is to do testing and get her started on just some support supplements, not even glutathione, just NAC, some B complex. So get that liver going with the B6 and give her a little bit of energy in the citric acid cycle pathways with B complex. DHA specifically, beyond just omegas, DHA focuses more on the neural inflammation, and a major probiotic because she had a lot of antibiotics. So we're looking at mycotoxins, organic acids, and environmental pollutants. So those three, the MOE, that's the RTL Tox Complete. You can also add on glyphosate additionally. We're not going to look at the environmental pollutants today, but that is part of the panel. And when you get 2 or 3 of these tests together, the pricing is greatly incentivized to combine them. And once you start getting these results at the same time, it's kind of like if you do a food sensitivity test, you want the GI results. So if you do a GI test, you want the food sensitivity results because you're working with those items at the same time. So it's helpful to have these pieces of information together. So the follow-up was great. She's feeling much better. The brain's working better. It wasn't even a goal, but she was able to start working a little part-time and having more energy, and she wasn't nervous to drive, right? When your nervous system is overwhelmed, you're oversensitive to stimuli. Driving can be very stressful. The bad part, though, is that she was in a little bit of a herx here. She had too much of a detox reaction. Her skin was going into all kinds of flare-ups and digestion, nausea, and headaches. So we have to back it off a little bit. If you come in with the glutathione and the binders like gangbusters, you're going to end up with a lot of this. So you have to start at the lower end and try to work up to where you'd like to be and see what the person can tolerate. Low and slow. So her testing, right? Again, this doesn't look like someone who's severely ill. The numbers don't show us the severity of the illness. They don't show us where the mycotoxins came from. They don't show us when the person got them because they're longer term toxins with a longer half-life, so slow to detoxify. And let's see, I want to always point out the trichothecene group because these macrocyclic trichothecenes only come from Stachybotrys. So that is behind the drywall. And it's harder to find. So we've got some special things that we teach people to do to make sure that it's picked up in the home. Excuse me. Okay, so her citric acid cycle is all a little bit elevated. So the pyruvate is just kind of jammed up high. So we're not being able to process. So this is due to this sort of a backlog from these things being elevated. So we've got, right, so we want our 30 to 70%. We've got a lot of raised numbers there. Her detoxification, remember the previous person was elevated. This person is on the low end. Now the low end is more phase 1. The higher end is more supporting phase 2. So she's going to need a lot more of the phase 1 support. Okay, some other clues, neurotransmitter metabolism. So this is a very neuroinflammatory pattern where you've got the quinolinate higher than the kynurenate. Okay, and then for bacteria metabolism, 33 is the one that tends to jump up very high. So she doesn't look like she has a lot of elevated bacteria metabolism, right? So going on in the gut. But the tricarbamylate alone is very high. So that looks more like an indicator of a mycotoxin. Okay, so we need to modify the plan for her and back off. We'll switch the NAC to every other day. Reduce the B6 a little bit. We're going to add some quercetin for histamine support to deal with the breakouts, to get her some more antioxidant. And remember with antioxidants, they recharge each other. So we want to get the variety of antioxidants. I mentioned with the detox support, we're going to do a whole phase 1 liver support, broad spectrum liver support, We're going to add liposomal glutathione. We're going to add CoQ10 and vitamin C and a binder. And then we can start pushing out toxins. For this one, I don't think I'm going to go to pushing out the toxins too soon. We're going to leave her on this a little bit and just help support her first. She needs a leaky gut formula to reduce discomfort and an electrolyte blend. We've got a nice electrolyte blend here. And phosphatidylcholine you can use for everyone. Support the bile, so it's another liver support, and the membranes. One thing that we're doing with glutathione, liposomal glutathione, it's helping your fat-based cell membranes with a fat base glutathione to release the mycotoxins. They don't just store in fat like chemicals, they kind of go throughout the body. And so the liposomal glutathione helps the cells to release those. So phosphatidylcholine will kind of tie in with that and support that process.
Welcome to Rupa Health, the best place to order, manage, and track results from over 30 different lab companies in one single place for free. It's going to take you under 2 minutes to sign up, and you can order any functional medicine lab for your client in under 30 seconds. Let me show you how it's done. So here's our beautiful interface. I'm typing in the name of my client, selecting the lab that I want to order for them, and hitting send. From there, Rupa and their amazing team handle the rest. They email the client, collect payment, and even offer an interest-free 3-month payment plan. We've also built the world's largest library of information about chronic health conditions, the lab tests that can help you find the root cause, and the evidence-based interventions that you can use to help people heal from them. It's called the Rupa Health Magazine. There, we have in-depth articles about almost any health condition you can imagine. And we give you step-by-step protocols that other clinicians have used to help their clients heal and that are verified by evidence-based sources. You should totally check it out, and it'll transform your practice. And we can't wait to see you. So make sure you sign up today at rupahealth.com.